Hey everybody, Eric with MountainModernLife.com. Today we wanted to touch base on our recent stay at Don Carter State Park. Now some of you may recall that we recently came out with a video and a post on Fort Yargo State Park. Well, while we were there, we learned about a cool thing that Georgia State Parks offer, and that is the Georgia State Parks Passport Book, which is a nice little book that has little spots for stickers. And what you're able to do is collect a sticker for every night you stay at a Georgia State Park. Now, once you add up to where you've stayed 9 nights, you get the 10th night free. So before we left Fort Yargo State Park, we heard about this and we were really close. I think we were at 8 nights. So we were just going to extend our stay there a couple more days, but we were coming up on the weekends and it had unfortunately already booked out. So then we started looking north because our plan was to head up to North Carolina. And when we were looking for different campsites and things like that, a lot of the places that Katie had heard of and we wanted to stay at were actually already booked up as well. And then that's when we came across Don Carter State Park, which is actually the newest state park in Georgia, and it's located on Lake Lanier. It was really a beautiful location. And real quick, we're going to go ahead and dive into the pros and cons of our experience there. All right, so we got up to Don Carter State Park. Let's dive into the pros real quick. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it is the newest state park in Georgia, and you can definitely see that. You can see it from the restrooms being cleaned and upkept, all the way to the actual trees and the debris and branches that are around. You can tell that everything is relatively new and has relatively recently been cleaned out. So we actually ended up extending our stay a little bit after even we got our free night. And a big part of that was because we knew some storms were on the way and we didn't want to be driving around and moving about in them. So we hunkered down and held tight there. And even after some of the strong wind and gusts came through, there wasn't much debris that had flown around, even though we were in the middle of the woods. So that's a really nice aspect to it. Another thing is that in order to get to the campground where the RVs are located and the primitive campsites and cabins, there's actually a security gate which you're given a code to. So it is well secured for your stay, so you don't have to worry about random people coming through and driving through the campground when you're trying to get a good night's rest. That was pretty nice to know. Another thing is that the campground hosts that were there on site were very friendly and informative, not just about the state park, but also about a lot of areas around northern Georgia and southern North Carolina and Tennessee. Had many good conversations with them and really appreciated their experience and knowledge and the fact that they were willing to share and converse with us. Another thing too is that the hiking trails are easily accessible from the campground, and they're pretty nice hiking trails. Now when we were there, a lot of the trees were still dead, so not very green, but you could see the blooms starting to form and things like that, so it was really cool. And the trail actually winds down around the lake and through the woods, which is pretty nice. Lake Lanier is a great lake, and there's a couple viewing spots where you're able to get out above the water and things like that. Another good thing is the dump station. So at Fort Yargo, they had one dump station on the way out, and we didn't run into any problems with that. But I would imagine if a whole lot of campers were trying to get out on the same day, you could probably end up with a little backup. So at Don Carter, they actually have two dump stations on the way out, which are evenly spaced apart. So I'd imagine if, let's say you're there for a busy holiday weekend or something like that, you'd be able to get out relatively quickly because of the fact that they have the two separate dump stations. Another thing too is that the campground was very family friendly. There were lots of families around, and they have a nice beach area where you're able to take your kids if you have kids. So if you're looking for a place that is family oriented, Don Carter State Park definitely could fill that need. If you're looking to avoid the family atmosphere, you may want to choose another location, but I would imagine that could all depend on the weekend and what's going on at the time. The next thing is that there are a few campsites that are really nice. They actually have lake views. They're through the trees. Kind of a downfall to those lake view campsites is that the trailheads are located relatively close, so you may have a decent amount of foot traffic going through your backyard, so to speak. Katie and I actually chose spot number 40. So if you're going through there, 40 seemed a little bit more spacious with a little bit more room and not having campsites right on top of you. But but throughout the entire campground for the RVs, the campsites are pretty close. Now, it didn't necessarily feel like we were all on top of each other at spot number 40, but some of the locations are relatively close together, so keep that in mind. Take that at your own judgment. But if you are going to Don Carter and want to check it out, the spot that we think is the absolute best is number 42. It was actually right on the other side of ours, and there weren't many neighbors around that spot, and you were able to look through the trees and see the lake. Not a crystal clear view, but you were able to look through and see the shimmer of the sunlight and things like that, which was pretty nice. But it was probably the most secluded spot at the campground. So if we were to ever go back, we would definitely try our best to get spot number 42. But that about wraps it up for the pros for the campsite. We did enjoy our stay while we were there, but let's go ahead and dive into the cons real quick. All right, so we've talked about all the positive of our trips, and let's touch base a little bit on some of the cons. Now, they're not huge cons, but they definitely are things that could influence your decision to stay at Don Carter State Park. One, not a big one, but there was one night where I just really wanted a Dr. Pepper, and I went down to the soda machine, and it actually wouldn't take my quarters. It just kept spitting them right back out, and I looked for other options to pay, which didn't work either. So the soda machine was down. I'm not sure if that was just a temporary thing or what was going on. Though it looked like it was operational, it wouldn't take my quarters. But there was only that one night I wanted to get a Dr. Pepper, so I moved on relatively quickly from that. And as I mentioned earlier too, some of the spots are relatively close together, which can make it feel kind of claustrophobic maybe a little bit. But for the most part, we didn't feel that way. We were most certainly able to see all of our fellow neighbors outside of our windows, but it didn't feel like they were right on top of us. However, some of the campsites that are through the campground are a little bit closer together and kind of lined up, so just something to take into account if you're heading over to Don Carter. And last but not least, this was probably the biggest one for us, was that the roadways through the campground were extremely confusing. So what can be considered a plus is the amount of pull-through spots that they had in the campground. But where that kind of turned into a minus is the fact that a lot of times as you're driving through, being able to determine what's the road and what's the pull-through campsite becomes a little confusing, and it requires you to definitely bob and weave your way throughout the entire campground, so it can be kind of confusing. Now, you might have noticed in the beginning video when we drove in and I split the screen into two different views, there are two different entrances into the campground. Now, the first one, the view that was on the left, is actually the first entrance. You can drive in there, but that way does get relatively confusing because you have to pass through all the pass-through camp spots, and that's where you can kind of lose orientation. Now, if you continue straight and go around to the second entrance, it can become a little clearer because when you drive in, there's better arrows on the road from that direction. So if you are pulling in for the first time with your camper or your pull behind, I would definitely recommend going to the second entrance. We were informed that when we first got there. However, when we first pulled in, it was a little confusing without being able to see it. So we pulled in through the first spot, and it was a little tight driving the Class A all the way through the campground through all the winds and turns. So just think about using the second entrance if you're going that way. Now, with all that said about how confusing it is, after you're there a little while and you drive through there a couple times, you definitely get a handle on it. But just be prepared to pay close attention as you're driving through the first time. But that about wraps it up for the cons. Real quick, I'm going to show you a little bit of our hiking footage and some pictures we took. You may remember if you watched our Fort Yargo video that we were trying out our GoPro's headset. Well, for this trip, we tried out our GoPro chest set that attaches the GoPro to our chest. And it wasn't any better as far as the shakiness goes, so we didn't get to use a lot of our footage. The good news is that after trying both of these headsets and chest set, me and Katie have come to the realization that we have to get a gimbal so that it can be a lot smoother in the future. So that's something to look forward to. But anyway, I put together a little bit of video clips and pictures so that you can get an idea of what Don Carter has to offer. Hope you enjoy. right, so that about wraps up our stay at Don Carter State Park. We did enjoy our stay. We had a weekend where Katie's mom actually came up for a Saturday and Saturday night and hung out with us. We had a fire. The stars are beautiful from the campground. Overall, it was a great experience. We did enjoy it. I'm not sure if we'll be back in this area to stay again. We would definitely recommend if someone's swinging through the area to stay there. It's comfortable, it's secure, and it's a good place. So definitely check it out. And if you've stayed there before or you're thinking about staying there and you have any questions or comments, definitely feel free to leave them below. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you much for watching today, and we'll see you guys again soon.